Welcome back. Over the years, Riverkeeper has played a crucial role in cleaning up the Hudson, restoring it as a part of the a vibrant waterway for boating and fishing and swimming, as well as ensuring safe drinking water for millions of New Yorkers. Now, with a focus on reducing fish kills, protecting drinking water, and enhancing public access to the river, Riverkeeper relies on citizen involvement and expert alliances to address environmental violations. Here now to share their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by the President of Riverkeeper, Tracy Brown. And Tracy, glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
Thank you. A lot of great work that goes on, and really in making sure that the Hudson River is well taken care of. Talk to me about, if you will, the history here.
Well, Riverkeeper was founded by fishermen in the 1960s. The motivation was the discovery of pollution getting into the fish and really threatening what was then an active fishing industry on the Hudson. And it was before the Clean Water Act was passed. And so it was a bit of an era of free-for-all polluting into the river. And so the fishermen organized to try and stop the pollution and protect their industry and their way of life. And unfortunately, they didn't succeed in that goal. Really kind of the death blow for recreational and commercial fishing in particular on the Hudson was the discovery of the PCB contamination from the General Electric plant. So we don't have really that vibrant commercial fishing anymore, but it did get this movement started, and we're 50 years, almost 60 years into the work now, and we certainly have been bolstered by the Clean Water Act and by increased awareness and investment. And now the Hudson, while we still do have problems with the PCBs, and a lot of other challenges that we're working on, we do have people doing recreational fishing, swimming, boating, and getting more of those benefits that you expect when you live on a beautiful waterway.
Yeah, you kind of like leaned into my next question. Give me the present up-to-date status from your perspective, how you view the Hudson River.
Yeah, so, the Hudson River is this incredibly important linchpin in the whole life flow of the eastern seaboard. So the Hudson as an estuary is a basket of life for fish that come out of the Atlantic, come up into the Hudson to spawn. Their young return back to the Atlantic and, are part of that incredible food basket that so many communities beyond ours rely on. So I'd say for me, the most important function of the Hudson is that breathing, living ecosystem that is part of our whole web of life. On that front, I would say that we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, we've had some recovery, but definitely the fish in the Hudson and some of our signature fish are really down in terms of numbers. And there's a lot of pressure both in the Hudson itself and out in the Atlantic from the fishing industry. But there's so many ways to look at the river. It's such a tough question because we really rely on the river to serve so many roles for us: energy, transportation, recreation, food, public, access, cooling now as we look at climate. So there's different measures, I would say, in general. It certainly is no time to ease up on our work in protecting this important estuary river and kind of increasing the awareness of all the ways that it serves us and all the ways that we've impacted its health and its future.
Yeah. For a major portion of my life, I lived on 157th Street and Riverside Drive, directly facing the Hudson River. And I always had the opportunity of looking out, seeing the river, and then seeing New Jersey right on the other side. And I remember conversations that always used to come up with our family that we were always concerned about some of the environmental challenges that really surrounded the Hudson and the efficacy there of the Hudson due to environmental challenges. Talk to me about what you're seeing today by way of environmental challenges. I know we've made some great progress, but the challenges are still present.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So where you were living before, you would have been really close to the wastewater treatment plant there in Harlem.
Yeah.
So one of the big problems that we have, especially in the New York metro area, is sewage. New York City has had the same number of wastewater treatment plants for decades, but certainly not the same number of residents. So when the city was built, there were old technologies that were used where the sewage and the rain from the waters all were designed to go to the plants and get treated together. And in the majority of the city, 60% of the city, the sewage infrastructure still works that way. So every time it rains, rainwater goes into the pipes with the sewage and the wastewater from our buildings and our homes, and it inundates the existing wastewater infrastructure, and it bypasses untreated or partially treated, just kind of screened, but not treated for bacteria, this wastewater right into our waterways. So every year right now, New York City residents are dumping, legally dumping, unfortunately, 21 billion with a B gallons of untreated or partially treated sewage into the waterways around New York City. So that is enough sewage to fill the Empire State Building 17 times. So
Wow.
it's a massive volume. And so New York City really needs to add more wastewater treatment capacity. Just touching on one issue, but that's a big one.
That's a big one. I mean, when you talk about the Empire State Building 17 times, I don't know if you don't come away and say that's not a big one. That's a huge one.
Yeah, and it's crazy that it is acceptable. So we're 50 years into the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act promised us swimmable and fishable and drinkable water for everyone in America by 1986. And we are not there. And I will say, respect to the current New York City Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection and the mayor for setting a goal to get rid of these combined sewer overflows by 2060. But really, the only way they're going to get that goal met is by adding more sewage treatment capacity, because the people aren't going away. The rain certainly isn't going away. We're going to have more rainwater than ever. And the current plan that we all need to get behind that is going to get that done is the Renewable Rikers Plan. And that involves closing down Rikers Island and in its place on that property, building a new state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant, which would also include renewable energy generation technology. And that one project could address both the water pollution issues that, just are at an insane scale, as you're hearing, for the city, but also air pollution issues, because we could get the peaker plant that creates a lot of the air pollution that is driving the illness in the Bronx and elsewhere in the city. So Renewable Rikers is one of our top priorities, getting that project done.
Yeah.
Happy to just kind of bring some vision to that. And a lot of people don't realize that in addition to incarceration reform and getting rid of a really terrible prison, whose closure is long overdue, that we will also at the other end get incredible environmental benefits if we can make that project happen.
Yeah, we were just talking in the last segment, don't know if you heard, last segment we just shared a little bit about the Auburn Correctional Facility and just talking about the prison, the negative effect of of incarceration and the prison system in Auburn. We know that talking with you about some of the things that you're talking about, there's a little correlation. But I also want to talk a little bit about pollution enforcement, because that's huge. If we're talking about pollution as being 17 times the Empire State Building, you've got multiple offenders. What are we doing here by way of pollution enforcement? Have things gotten better to really curb the fact that people, take the pollution seriously?
Yeah, so the pollution where we've made the best headway is really industrial pollution from private businesses. That's what the Clean Water Act is designed to get to. We also have made great progress on Superfund cleanup. So Riverkeeper discovered the Exxon oil spill in Newtown Creek, and we're really instrumental in getting that set up as a Superfund site cleanup. We also have been deeply involved in the Superfund site that is the Gowanus Canal and the Hudson River for PCBs. So those kind of big industrial toxic pollution issues are the ones where we've made the most progress. The pollution that's kind of baked into our municipal civic life in the form of wastewater treatment, that's where we haven't been as successful. And, the state has written a permit and there's plans for the city to reduce the combined sewer overflows, but not eliminate them. So it's always kind of a mixed story. And then another piece of the puzzle that Riverkeeper is very involved in is protecting the drinking water supply for New York City. The source of the drinking water that comes from upstate from these reservoir systems up in the Catskill area. So that's a whole nother universe of challenges and I would say overall success in providing New York City with great drinking water and making sure that continues. But now with climate impacts, there's new stressors and new things to be thinking about. And also on the toxic front, we have the new category of forever chemicals that people are more aware of, the PFAS and PFOS, and looking at those in our drinking water supplies and tackling that. So it is multi-generational work. That's why, like I said, the organization's older than I am, and I know we'll have teams of people here well into the future continuing to do this work for the public.
Yeah. The Hudson River is also home to power plants. And for people who may not be so familiar, talk to us about how many power plants we have along the Hudson and where the challenges lie, because although they're there are some serious situations there.
Yeah. So using the river for energy and then also for waste disposal and kind of outsourcing some of the costs of energy generation. I mean, that's a forever legacy. You could go back to the early days when we were just damming up all the little tributary streams of the Hudson to turn, mills and make paper and grind grain. I mean, we're still dealing with the legacy of over 1,000 abandoned dams from that version of energy generation. And then you go forward to the Indian Point nuclear power plant, which sucked in the Hudson River and used the Hudson River to cool its nuclear reactors. It's what we called once-through cooling. So it was like an incredible fish killing machine to suck in the river and heat it up with all the fish that would come through and the fish eggs that would come through. So that was a huge challenge that had a very negative effect on just the biomass and the life in the Hudson. So we worked hard to get that shut down and decommissioned safely. And now we have the hydropower coming from Quebec. We have the Champlain Hudson Power Express line, which instead of running cables along the highways or existing power cuts, decided it would be cheaper and easier to just run those giant cables through the river. So now we're looking at what's it going to mean to have, the largest extension cord in the world run from Canadian dams all the way down into New York City. So it's, there's always something around power. There's some old plants that we're trying to keep from getting kind of repurposed in the old fossil fuel paradigm and trying to support renewable energy as much as we can. But also wanting to make sure that these new renewable energy infrastructure choices use existing industrial sites, brownfields, power cuts, places where we've already, taken the hit on the ecosystem and don't just kind of go into the river and new ecosystems to expedite the work or make the corporate profit better.
Yeah. Can you give me a little update as to where we stand? I know Indian Point is closed, but yet and still, eyes are still wide open.
Yeah, so getting Indian Point closed was a major campaign of Riverkeepers, and we succeeded in getting that done in 2021. And Indian Point at that point was one of the oldest still operating nuclear power plants in the country. It was having multiple failures. There was substantial radioactive wastewater that came out of leaks in different parts of the cooling infrastructure. And now we have a big radioactive groundwater plume underneath that site that still needs to be fixed. And that is, slowly making its way into the river. So when you have a plant like that, we don't have a federal repository for nuclear materials. So basically every community that has had a nuclear energy plant now basically is looking towards having a permanent nuclear energy waste storage site in its community, because there is no place to send that waste. And I think there's an argument to be made that the community that's benefited from the generation of that energy all those years actually should be responsible for the waste that it generates. So that's the phase we're at now, is looking at the site. We have fortunately hit the milestone where the rods, the spent fuel rods, have been safely contained. So the risks of radioactive disaster happening at that site through an incident is now behind us, which is great. And now we're just looking at that kind of long-term pollution and how we continue to get the site cleaned up. And you might have heard in the news that Holtec, the company that's decommissioning the plant, wanted to just dump into the Hudson wastewater from the spent fuel pools that included tritium. Riverkeeper was very involved in getting a New York State law passed to block that, and we're really happy that passed and the governor signed it, and they're not allowed to just use the Hudson River as a dumping ground for the waste from that plant. But they're now challenging that in court. So it's the bottom line is obviously more important to Holtec than hearing the will of the people who say, we've done all this work to restore this river, and you're going to set us back, and you're going to hurt our economic recovery and our ecological recovery if you continue to use the Hudson as a dumping ground. So that is an ongoing battle, but those are the type of battles that Riverkeeper's kind of built and staffed to fight. So we'll continue to fight and be a voice for keeping this river alive and as clean and accessible as we can.
Yeah. When we talk about the Hudson River, I know there's upstate, there's downstate, but let me go back down to the city for a moment and talk a little bit about that. As we see, numbers are projected that there should be tremendous growth occurring in New York City in the coming years. We know that there's construction going on, and an anticipated number of new New Yorkers are expected. What does that mean for you in terms of the Hudson River, and in terms of opportunity, and then also in terms of challenge?
Yeah. So, it's amazing to me that we are willing to just keep adding people and adding toilets and sinks without adding to the wastewater infrastructure capacity. So that disconnect really has to be addressed. That's issue number one. Issue number two, when we look at what's happening with climate and sea level rise, and New York City is going to be one of the places on the planet that experiences the most acute sea level rise, just by way of the narrow rivers that surround the city, the connection to the Atlantic Ocean and the Sound, because sea level rise isn't equal everywhere. So New York City is going to have tremendous sea level rise, and we need to stop building in floodplains. We need to stop filling in wetlands. We need much more protective zoning and development laws in place. It's crazy where we have continued to build right up to the edge of this waterfront. And so people want to be on the waterfront, and then the sea level rise is going to come, the more heavier storms, and all of that new development and the old development that's right up to the waterfront will be vulnerable. And then we're going to be talking about either retreating and pulling back and the wasted effort on those built environments that can't withstand the test of time, or putting up walls to put people behind walls. And people didn't move to the waterfront to be behind a wall. That's not why they want to be there in the first place. So the city really needs to be looking at more climate aware development and zoning, and really being thoughtful about focusing on the high ground areas. And also, there's great concern about people who are in communities that are built over buried rivers, and people who aren't even near the waterfront, but now are finding in major storm events that the water rises up through their basement or through their first floor apartment. So that's a huge concern. So these are some of the challenges that we need to all be really assessing and making the priority in any and all building decisions today going forward.
Yeah, I think public access to the Hudson River has always been a question that's come to mind. I think about right now, there is access from where I used to live. But at times it wasn't always the case. You know, it was a beautiful place to look and see, but it was hard to access. How are you seeing the evolution of public access to the Hudson River now?
So that's a really interesting area of discussion. So, obviously we've gotten, a lot of access on the Manhattan side. One thing that's been happening that's interesting is now the Army Corps of Engineers is coming in with this big plan to address storm surges and flooding for the city, coastal flooding primarily for the city from storms. And this is kind of the follow-up to the disaster of Superstorm Sandy. And the initial plan from the Army Corps was to say, okay, well, where we have public access, we're going to do things like take this park and elevate the park so people can still have the access that they're used to, the environment. But places where communities don't have the public access, for example, in the South Bronx, well, there's no houses there, so let's just kind of raise the walls and raise what we already have in place. But thankfully, there are amazing groups in the Bronx, like the Sustainable South Bronx, the Bronx Council for Environmental Quality, the Bronx River Alliance, who are saying, whoa, this is an opportunity where we're investing in our waterfronts. We have plans. We want waterfront access. We've already organized as a community to say where we want it and how we want it. So let's try and take this kind of unusual opportunity to get some federal dollars to our coastlines and build out what we should have, not just a wall, because a wall is what we have now. Like, let's get our people to the river and make that possible. So that's something that we've been working really hard to amplify those voices and support those voices and those local plans to build in more access as we build in more preparedness. And it all makes logical sense too, because when you think of what's the most flood resilient when flooding does happen, it is a park. It is a basketball court. These are things where waters can come in. People don't live there. It's shared space. It can get wet, and then the water can come out, and those spaces can recover and still function for a community. So we're really hoping that as we look at this investment in sustainability and storm readiness, that there'll be more public space, especially in the Bronx and along the East River, where there isn't as much as we have on the Hudson right now.
Only have a couple of seconds left, but before we go, I just want to have an opportunity to hear from you. Legislatively, what things should the public be paying attention to that maybe can help to, improve the work that you're doing?
Oh boy, that's such a good question. So, the main thing is always first and foremost, the budget and making sure that every year the state is spending money on water infrastructure and for drinking water and recreational water and wastewater. That is so critical, and there's such a huge backlog of work. We just have to keep chipping away and making those investments. And then otherwise, there's the New York SWIMS Act that we are supporting. That's about getting more people into the water. We made modifications to look to prioritize natural spaces instead of just building pools, make sure that we look at where people can get in the water, where they have access to a river or a lake or a pond. We also are trying to get some legislation passed that would allow stormwater authorities to be set up. This would be a way for the city to get rates to help with stormwater and flooding, where people are incentivized to have more green space on their property and less parking lots and hard space. And that's really critical, because one of the main things about flooding and getting better around reducing flooding is absorbing the rain in place and not just having it bounce off a hard surface into a storm drain and end up in the city with all that sewage that we were talking about at the top of the show. So that's just a quick priorities: water, rainwater, drinking water, wastewater.
Tracy Brown, thank you so much for joining us and sharing today. Great conversation, and we thank you for the efforts that's being done to preserve, maintain the good things along the Hudson River. And Riverkeeper, great work. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to connect soon. And of course, if you ever need to holler to us about what's going on the Hudson, you got a partner and a friend over here.
Thank you so much. It was really great chatting with you. Appreciate
Alrighty.
it.